back to Calbeckistan, where anybody can learn math. I'm Mr. Calbeck, and this is episode 5 in our crash course on factoring, where we're putting it all together. All of the things that you have been learning so far in the previous 4 episodes, we're going to combine those in this one today and see if you can put those different structures together. So we're going to look at this first problem here, and hopefully this is going to look a little bit familiar from the last episode. This is called the difference of squares, but you're not necessarily going to see that at first glance. All you might recognize on this problem is that you have something squared minus something else. The square root of 50 isn't very nice. The square root of 32 isn't very nice either. So we can't do our a squared minus b squared trick. That isn't going to work here because I don't have a whole number that will fit into those categories. But if we combine another strategy we learned in a previous episode, we can solve this. And that is finding a common multiple. Now, you should always check for a common multiple on every factoring problem. If you can do that, you're going to be in great shape. So in this one, I'm going to see that 50 is even and 32 is even. So I'm going to divide both of these by 2 and see if that helps me at all. Remember, when we're dividing by 2, we're really undistributing a 2 from both terms. So that 2 is going to come out front here. And I'm going to be left with 25x squared minus 16. And I'm hoping if you see this one here, that this is going to look a lot nicer for you. 25 is a square number, 16 is a square number, so that's going to fit into our a squared minus b squared category, where a is going to be the square root of 25x squared. The square root of 25x squared, the square root of 25 is 5, the square root of x is x. Remember, this right here factors to a minus b and a plus b. So when I find the square root of a squared, I get a, which again was 5x. The square root of 16 is 4, so I have a 5x minus 4, and then the other one is going to be 5x plus 4. And don't forget, whenever you factor out a common multiple, it still shows up in the front. So we got right here a common multiple with a difference of squares. So you're combining 2 different ideas, and teachers love to throw stuff like this at you to see if you really do understand factoring. All right, let's look at another one. Here's our next one we're going to try to factor. And if you remember what we did in the last one, it's going to give you a pretty good clue on how we're going to try to tackle this problem. Remember, always look for a common multiple if you can on every problem that you're factoring. It will make them easier, and sometimes it's the only way to factor stuff. All right, so we're going to take a look at this one right here. 6 is divisible by 2, but 3 isn't. So we can't use 2. Let's check 3. 6 is divisible by 3, 3 is divisible by 3, and 30 is divisible by 3. So we're going to factor out 3 from everything. Again, undistributing that 3. If we do that, we're left with 3 times 2x squared plus 1x minus 10. And so once you factor out that common multiple, now all you have to do is factor what's inside the parentheses. And again, these numbers are so much smaller, it's going to be a lot easier to do. So remember, whenever you are factoring with a common, or with a leading coefficient that doesn't factor out, our first step is to multiply the first and last terms together, which in this one is going to give you negative 20, and it has to add to be the middle term, positive 1. A lot of people won't necessarily put that 1 in there, so if you see a problem like this, this is the same idea. You don't have to write a 1 next to an x. I like to do that. I call it a ninja 1, because you never know where those ninja 1s are, and if you don't see them, they stab you in the back, just like real ninjas. Ninja 1s, right? So we'll look for multiples of negative 20 that add to be 1. 1 and 20 won't work. 2 and 10 won't work. 4 and 5 will, but I have to be careful about where my negative is. So The 5 can't be negative because it would have to be negative 1. The 4 has to be negative. Rewrite my middle term. So I have 2x squared minus 4x plus 5x minus 10. And then we factor out a common multiple from each set of parentheses. We got that right there. And I'm going to be 2 and 2 here. And remember, this first one's almost always going to have an x. Look for that. That's going to undistribute to give me 2x. 2x squared divided by 2x is x. Negative 4x divided by positive 2x is negative 2. Over here, my biggest common factor is going to be 5. Undistributed 5. And I'm left with x minus 2 there. Remember, these parentheses have to be the same or you can't do this. We undistribute now the entire x minus 2. If you do that, that gives you x minus 2. And what's left is 2x and 5. So we have 2x plus 5. And you factored it. But remember, we factored out a 3 that has to be there in the beginning. Most teachers will mark you down if you forget that, even if you remember to factor it out at the beginning, because it doesn't disappear. All we're doing when we factor is rewriting the original term. So these need to be equivalent, the original problem and your factored form. So if you forget that 3, you're not going to get it right. All right, I've got one more quick question for you. See if you can handle this one. All right, here's my last problem. This one's a doozy. I give this to my students, and so many of them struggle to solve it. But we have to remember our first rule is to always look for a common multiple. So see if you can find a common multiple here. This is divisible by 2, and this is divisible by 2. It doesn't look like anything else is going to divide out, so I'm going to divide out a 2 here, but there's actually one thing more we can divide out in this problem. They both have an x, so that means we can divide out an x as well. Again, we're factoring that out, undistributing the 2x. If we factor out a 2x, that's going to leave me 6x squared divided by 2x is just going to be 3x. Negative 20x divided by 2x is negative 10. You can't factor this any farther. There's no squared, there's nothing that will divide out. You are done. This one is so confusing for students because it's so simple. If you remember to look for a common multiple, sometimes that's all you can do. And that is awesome. If you can factor it out at the beginning, save yourself a lot of time and trouble. Don't try to do a difference of squares here because they're not squared. You can't factor out any other method because you don't see an x squared. So look for that common multiple. It will save you a lot of time. And this is factored. Again, remember the whole purpose of factoring is to find two numbers that multiply together to be your original term. And if we multiply this back in, you'll see you get 6x squared minus 20x. So you do get what you started with. It is factored. That's your answer. Okay? So look for that. Your teachers will love to throw in one of those. And if you forget to do a common multiple, you'll miss that. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned next time. I'm going to do a bonus episode about challenging test questions. So if you are already kind of mastered this, go ahead and tune into that bonus episode where you're going to see some really challenging questions your teachers might throw in as extra credit, or if you're in an honors class, you'd be likely to see them. All right, we'll see you next time.